Good evening. Today is July 19th, 2021, and this is the 60th episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari. My guest today is my friend, Dr. Stephen Hollingshead, who is the CEO of the fintech startup ChangeInEx and also the principal owner of the economic and also business development consulting company, Candor LLC. Stephen is also the founder of the Friends of Libya Foundation and IraqiHaven.org, which is a project of the Center for Expeditionary Economics. Stephen has written in the Real Clear World, the Washington Times, National Review, and also the Huffington Post. Dr. Hollingshead has also served on the Compliance and Risk Management and Auditing Committees on the board of Merckscope Holdings, which is the mortgage industry utility that operates the mortgage electronic registry services, helping guide that particular company through a very difficult time fraught with regulatory and also legal risks to a successful sale to the Intercontinental Exchange, which are the owners of the New York Stock Exchange. Dr. Hollingshead also served in the Bush administration as a senior advisor to the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and also as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Enforcement, while he was at the same time coordinating the President Bush's management agenda for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. The Government Accounting Office, GAO, was able to remove HUD at that time from its high-risk list for the first time ever. As the $40 billion department's chief enforcement official, he was able to realign all the 6 enforcement centers, eliminating the H case backlog of 4,500 cases, while also at the same time increasing the portfolio receives. Dr. Stephen Hollingshead brings knowledge as a former financial regulatory individual, advisory to solve the derisking crisis right now globally affecting the banks, where they are pulling from those developing markets given the post 9/11 regulations. Stephen, it's good to have you on our show today and on such a short turnaround from our meetings that took place in DC this past Friday. My hope is that the guidance that you gave at the time during our conversations with the Senate and House staffs would lead to some key legislation, hopefully, in this year's Congress, and they addressing what you have in the past pointed out as being the most unintended consequence of those post 9/11 regulations. And I hope that we can also discuss what is happening with how China expanding using those regulations against us. Welcome.
It's great to be here, and it's so great to get to know you. We begin from we love a lot of the same places, I really appreciate the work that you've done in Iraq. And I know we're going to talk about ChangeInEx today, but for me, that's where all this began, in a refugee camp in Ankawa, Iraq, where I realized, or began to realize, it actually took me a little while to figure out the problem and exactly why there are 1 billion people with a smartphone in their pocket but no access to financial services. So thanks for having me on.
No, look, I know, there's always our origin story, as they say, and I know that yours really started trying to find a solution to the issues that some of the refugees were having. Look, even to this day, I established the United Syrian Appeal, which is my 501c3 that was helping with the multi-families of the Syrian Christians with the Syrian army that were fighting in Iraq and Syria between 2014 and 2017. But even today, just trying to get money down to those families is difficult. Either you have to use a hawala system, or when we were initially sending money down, we were getting flagged, trying to use the conventional systems. We were getting money that was being taken from us when we used the wire transfers. If money went into the banks in northern Iraq, sometimes it was being held by the banks who were just releasing certain percentage of it. And it really doesn't help when it comes to developing what we're trying to do in the long run, which is allowing those individuals to develop the structures they need internally to go back and establish the rule of law, economic prosperity for them, or whatever you want to call it. And I know you have some viewpoints on how we could get there, which is why we're here talking about how your company initially was established. Give us some of the guidance that you gave to the staffers there in Congress this Friday, and what do you think should be the way forward?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that, it's best for your audience, I think, to understand that this is a problem that, it's one thing to say it affects 1 billion people, but, the way I learned about the problem, as you mentioned, I'm a former financial regulator, on board with all the big banks and everything else. And I thought I knew something about the international finance system. And yet I find myself, I'm sitting in a refugee camp in Ankawa with a lad from Karakosh. And even before, we sat down, he pulls out his phone. He says, his name's Gali. And he pulls out his phone. He says, "Hey, man, you got Facebook?" And, his family, his 7 brothers and sisters living there with their 2 parents and 2 4x2 meter plastic boxes, very well what this is like. And I'm just shocked, like, here, this kid wants to connect on Facebook even before we sit down. And so, we did that, and I gave him my phone so he could type his name in, and we connect and we sit down. And so we got our phones out, and he says, "Hey, man, I take pictures." And, we all take pictures. So I'm being polite. "Sure, let me see your pictures." And I'm flipping through this. This guy he's following ISIS around, watching them blow stuff up. He's, taking pictures, not just of his own camp, but all the refugee camps. He's got amazing pictures of hordes of Syrian refugees pouring across the Iraqi border. And, I'm like, this is valuable stuff. This is stuff that the New York Times should buy. This is, And so I said to him, I said, "Golly, you got to sell these. And, we want this story out there. And, you can get your family out of this camp." And he's like, "Oh, I'm a kid. I can." I said, "Don't worry. When I get back to the States, I've got some photographer friends. We'll help you set up a website. You take PayPal, you get paid, no problem." Now, this kid only needs to make like $50 a week, and he can, walk his family out of that camp, and so forth. And so, I thought, amidst all this rape and murder and all the horrible things, this was all, while ISIS was still occupying the Nineveh plain. And so I'm like, here's somebody we can help. Well, what I didn't know is that this kid can't get a bank account, and PayPal can't go to Iraq. And it all kind of goes back to the changes in regulations that were in the Patriot Act, or the change in law. The Patriot Act, 3rd section of the Patriot Act, changed the Bank Secrecy Act, and then the follow-on regulations from that essentially forced the central banks of the world to kind of go along if they want to touch a dollar. So what this did was essentially push the liability to ensure that someone was not a terrorist onto the banks. So they made the banks the cops. In part, that was because of the taking 1,800 guns and badges out of the Treasury Department and moving them to Homeland Security. And so one guy named Juan Zarate hired 6 civilians, no guns, no badges, to enforce against all the banks in the world. So how are you going to do it? So this huge push of the government sector of the liability onto the private sector to make sure that they're not doing business with terrorists. Well, that sounds great, except that when the penalties are so high, Obama, his Treasury punished Barclays with $1 billion civil money penalty, and I can imagine the conversation now. The general counsel goes to the CEO and says, "Missed a report in Somalia. We got $1 billion penalty. We don't make $1 billion in Somalia. We don't make $1 billion in all of Africa. Let's just get out." And so you've seen that rolling over the years, that in, some people call it over compliance if you're a regulator. Banks call it de-risking. We can't afford to take the risk to do business in these markets. And that rolls its way all the way down to, my friend Gali sitting in a refugee camp who has something valuable to sell, something he could sell online, and yet he can't because, and the banks could be making money, by offering him an automated account, but that it's not a technology problem; it's a legal problem. And so, so I set out to, once I understood the problem and where it came from, how would you solve the problem? And so, at the time, these new technologies were coming more and more into the fore. And, now they're commercially available. So it's, we use biometrics for a better understanding of who is carrying out a transaction. We use blockchain for indelibility, or, to prove that it can't be deleted. And we use big data, machine learning to create a compliance data stream for government. So essentially, and this is the very bottom of the common law, if you think about it, is record keeping. We can prove who did what, when, where, and that will allow the billion people who have a smartphone, in their pocket, access to global finance, and it will actually do a better job of catching the bad guys. But more importantly, it will give people the dignity of work, right? That's really what these refugees need, is the dignity of work. They don't need a handout. They don't want a handout. They want to earn, something. And again, you talk about empowerment. We come in and we argue about we're going to build that school first. We're going to do this. In my view, you get everybody a job, and then you let them decide when it's time to go home to Karakush, because they've rebuilt their own home with their own money. And you empower them. They decide whether healthcare or education or more important, So anyway, that's kind of our method and what we're at here. And there, I go all over Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and I see exactly the same problem. And that's what we've set out to solve.
No, look, I know that we kind of looked at from our end of how to maybe bypass some of the issues I told you that I was dealing with. And look, as I've said in the past, you could give money and food to refugees. Eventually, at the end of the day, they, it flushes out of their system, for the better term. It doesn't build anything, and it cannot be an endless supply. You have to allow them to be able to use their entrepreneurial skills to be able to develop their own little market niche, and then be able to, use it for their benefit and their family's benefit. I know one of the things that, being as a member of the ACAM Chicago chapter here, looking at the anti-money laundering and what are some of the effects as far as how Iran was trying to use money for its advantage against our foreign policies. I showed you that one slide deck that we looked at that round table. But that slide deck itself, as much as it went after Iran's money and allowed our banking institutions to block things, at the same time, when I created it, I looked at, okay, what do I need to do to alleviate the pressures and these friction points on the people who want to be able to get support, but they can't. I get it. And I had looked at digital currency, possibly using digital currency through those exchanges and the blockchain, being able to effectively make sure that the money is tracked from one end to another. I know you're kind of an agnostic, for the better term, as you have said in the past, on digital currency. I would like to be able to capture your thoughts on that. And then at the same time, if possible, discuss the fact that, we have these regulations that we follow, but China, Iran, and others do not follow the regulatory requirements that we do and are able to bypass everything that we have in the regulations that are from post 9/11.
Well, that's right. And, China's the whole other question, as far as U.S. policy goes here. The U.S. and European regulatory construct has held back a lot of tech innovation, whereas China has pushed it forward. And China's, there they call them the tech fins. They're out there gobbling up data and just getting bigger and bigger, and they're with an eye toward making the yuan the world reserve currency, or their central bank digital currency that they're looking at, so that they can track things and so forth. And as you see, I see on the screen now that this article here, it points out that SWIFT, which is the kind of messaging hub of our financial system, it's a Belgian company. It's a utility, but it's owned by private investors, and SWIFT has done a deal with China, right? So we're just, the U.S. government is hanging back, it seems to me, and just allowing China to gobble up this space, and that's an enormous mistake. If you think about the threat to the U.S. national security, and there are a number there, but one is, just think about, what if the dollar lost status as the world reserve currency? If that happened, what would happen to interest rates on U.S. government debt? And it doesn't have to go up very much at all to bankrupt the United States of America. Former chairman of Joint Chiefs once said that the biggest threat to American national security is our debt. I'm very sympathetic with that view, but again, think about so a mistake here that causes a swing in interest rates really can bankrupt our government. So why aren't we allowing companies to go out and do this? And I think in part, the bet that I'm trying to make is that better record keeping, using a way to automate the process to prove who did what weren't there, to take some of the judgment calls away from the banks, and because liability comes with those judgment calls, and allow the banks to go out and gobble up these markets. But I can tell you that China is very aggressively moving into the places. I work in Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. Yeah. And the number one issue from my standpoint, the number one issue for American interests in Middle East, Africa, and Latin America is China. I've never been to China, but I see China all over, the kind of triangle of instability, and they're out there. They don't care about making money next quarter. They have a very long time horizon. They care about creating infrastructure, which is a whole other conversation, but they care about having effective control of these countries. So they're kind of coming in, and countries need to choose: are we gonna look west, or are we gonna look east? And I think it's an enormous problem. So from my standpoint, what I'm trying to do is to prove that this works, to prove that consumers are willing all over the world. They're willing to be transparent to U.S. Treasury. They're, that financial institutions, both the local ones in these sovereign countries and international correspondent banks here in the United States, will participate in the system, and that ultimately that this will become a new standard. So what we're trying to do really is to replace SWIFT. Like SWIFT, we send messages between institutions, but unlike SWIFT, we're not slow, expensive, insecure. Remember when SWIFT lost $81 million out of Bangladesh's Fed account in 2015? So it's really kind of a mess that's still the standard. It's a great idea, but it's, essentially 1970s technology. So, we need a new way to do that has the value added of compliance. And so again, that's what we're all about. And we use biometrics, we use blockchain, we use big data, and that those technologies, which are fancy new things that are now commercially available, they really, in our system, serve a much older, grander purpose in terms of the common law, that record keeping of proving who did what, where, when is actually a way to liberate people, to allow them to participate in a system. We talk about financial inclusion. In fact, all the central banks of the world have this, organization where, and everybody, all these policymakers talk about the importance of financial inclusion. But the reality is that we have a system that is exclusionary on purpose. That because 0.1% of all these unbanked people may be terrorists, we keep out the 99.9%. That's not fair. It's also not good for catching terrorists. It's also not good for, for allowing, there are all of these places where without economic development, a lot of unemployed people sitting around, unemployed young males are a breeding ground for terrorism. We need young males of the world to be focused on that white picket fence and that family life, and that they need employment for that. So that keeps them future focused. If they are, if we keep them out of the system, that increases alienation, and it allows some, I don't say that poverty causes terrorism, but it creates an environment within which extremists can come and radicalize people. And so anyway, those are I think the policy reasons, the foreign policy reasons why the U.S. Treasury needs a better way. The current way isn't working since this kind of, let's call it kind of draconian system that has sort of cascaded down out of the Patriot Act. The results have not been good. That terror finance as a percentage of global income has gone up. Money laundering as a percentage of global income has gone up, not down. So, they could argue, well, it would have been even worse without what we did. Well, okay, maybe. But I think that we can go back to those much more historically low levels, and we can preserve the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency for another generation if we are willing to go out and establish this standard. So that's become my mission, and happy to.
No, look, it makes sense. Look, it makes sense because when I was looking at it, like I said, from our perspective, because with the SWIFT having agreements with the Chinese Communist Party, all the banks being tied to SWIFT, anybody who does work with those banks also being tied to SWIFT. We thought maybe is there a way and a possibility that we could use things outside of those traditional bankings, whether it be individual banks owned by various different communities, or even like an old system, as you would say, credit unions have a different procedures than you have a big banks that they have to follow. But and for me, when I was looking at it, as when we were looking at the digital currency piece, that an exchange could be anybody who could exchange money. So at the lowest levels, and I was trying to and hoping that in this case, a lot of the NGOs, those are non-government organizations or international government organizations that are out there, they try to do businesses in certain areas that are very critical, where genocides are taking place, where really the monetary value is not worth what it is, to be able to maybe use the digital currency capability to be able to at least not only allow in this case, from my perspective, the Department of Defense to be able to have a pretty good, eyes on what money is being moved, but at the same time gives us that blockchain capability, and maybe hopefully develop those currencies, and maybe even in the long run, those specific federal credit unions that are sitting here might be able to become, when those areas become a little bit more independent, really the banking system for those specific independent areas or countries. Your system can work at all levels, correct? Go ahead.
Yes, and you touched on an area that really kind of is a sensitive spot for me, because some of the most horrible stories, out of the Iraq reconstruction, are when a C-130 of $100 bills would sort of land there, and they'd be passing this money out. And there were examples of breaking down Al-Qaeda doors of a safe house and finding bricks of $100 bills that had arrived in the country and being distributed by USG only 2 weeks before. And, this is just absolutely horrible, where, wait, we're paying the bad guys. So with our system and the vendor vetting system that DOD uses on the ground in these countries is like really bear skins and stone knives. I mean, this is old technology. It doesn't allow them to track. And one of the things we could very easily do for DOD is, hey, just make them all use an account. And this essentially creates an audit trail. And so you could, using forensic analysis, you could very quickly figure out which are the shell companies that are, which are engaged in good business, great, and which are shell companies that are passing this, getting the money out in cash somehow and passing it on to the bad guys. And so at a minimum, we should make sure, and there have been several inspector general, reports about this problem, and DOD is still on it. But anyway, so it's a lot of things like that, fundamentally you want to be able to prove that you're getting the money to the right folks. And we need to use these new technologies. Blockchain is wonderful for that. You can have it basically proves that your record is far more likely to be accurate. It's really hard to, and way too expensive. I won't say impossible, but it's just really hard to tell a lie in the blockchain in terms of what happened. And so it's so much better than any kind of current record keeping system. Same thing with biometric. I mean, people talk about how you can fool it, but it's, scribble. When you buy lunch today, Sargis, write Mickey Mouse instead of your name, and it'll go through. I promise you'll still get your lunch on that credit card slip. So using your retina or your fingerprint or something else may not be perfect in some James Bond world, but it's a heck of a lot better than what we're doing today. So we need to use these technologies. But again, I get back to, the number one use case for me is there's all these people in tough spots who would love to work. We have this enormous resource, which is the human mind. And genius knows no borders. And there are all of these really smart people in these places who can't work as part of the global, the human family needs to be connected financially for us to continue to solve problems and to make this earth a better place. And we are turning our back on those folks all because we're afraid of terrorists. Look, I hate terrorists too. I want to catch bad guys. The current system doesn't do a very good job of that. And holding all of these people out of the system is a mistake. We need to welcome them in, and they will come in and they'll share information with us, by the way, data that will help us catch the bad guys. And so, I see this as a win-win-win-win. This solves the problem for the four, key groups. I think it's international regulators, it's, local sovereign governments who want to diversify their economy, bring in a little tax revenue, whatever. It solves the problem for the financial institutions themselves that have had to pull back because of the increased liability. And most of all, it solves the problem for those folks on the ground who want to work or who want to get paid by their families, across the pond. I mean, that's, to me, that's the way we can solve this.
Look, it's never going to be perfect. I mean, you're always going to have issues out there that you have to deal with. I know one of the pieces that you had looked at as far as how to maybe possibly try to wean off of China control of our tech, our chip technology. But the argument has been, well, if you work with, our countries are within our hemisphere, a lot of them are tied to the drug cartels. And if we try to, wean off of them and execute what you're talking about here specifically, we might be choosing one evil over the other. I don't know if you can talk about that a little bit, but I'm a true believer that you're never going to have perfect. You will have what you have, and you try to do your best in support of the American strategic policy in the long run to counter who's the big dragon in the room, which in this case is the Chinese Communist Party. Continuous expansion. Look, under COVID, their economy was the only one that grew. Everybody else's took a hit.
Yeah, it is a clear and present danger to the United States. And I realize I didn't fully answer one of your questions earlier. I think that our approach has not been to try to build some new coin that we think is going to be the world reserve currency. We want to support the dollar. And we do this I don't want to have to go into every single country and figure out how you get people to sign up for accounts, right? I mean, my job is to empower those local institutions. They know how to go sign up people for accounts. Empower the international institutions. They know how to get people over here to sign up and how to connect all that. And so my job is, I understand the regulators, I think, better than anyway. I'm, as far as I know, the only former regulator in this business working on this problem. And I know that, you're going to get ahead by being partners with regulators, not by trying to, a lot of the computer folks think that, government's not going to notice them. And this is the buzzsaw that Facebook ran into, right? So no, the way to do this is to solve this and to help regulators do their job better. And that's definitely our approach. And to work hand in hand with the financial institutions, with the local sovereign governments, and with their licensed institutions in those. So we think that this will scale much faster, and it's going to have to scale fast if we're going to, get ahead or back ahead of China. I think China is out, with the Swift article, they're doing deals with, our major international utility. They're out there pushing out all of these apps that are grabbing all kinds of data, and they have that goal to beat us, to beat us to the punch, and they're doing it while we sit back and allow them to.
Well, look, I think you just make it more streamlined, given the system you're using, and actually making more transparent. So there should not be an argument on that, unless you have individuals who don't want to see the transparency from the government side of the house. Because I hate to say it, a lot of the ways you launder money is through ensuring that there's no transparency, but that doesn't help resolve our issues on the ground. We don't want to get back into nation building, but folks that we try to help don't want you to come in and build a nation. They just want you to be able to stand by them, give them the opportunity and the ability to be able to build it internally themselves. And I think they'll know how to manage it better than we can, and actually distributes that wealth across the board at the lowest levels. And it doesn't just have us going and picking and choosing individuals that we give a lot of money to, government side of the house, and turns out that they were probably not the capable leaders we were hoping that they would be. And I think hopefully over the next couple of months or years, we'll be able to at least beta test that on one of the missions that I'm working on. And, we've talked about that at the round table. And hopefully that we'll see how it goes in the future. With that said, Stephen, I want to give you the last word. And then tell our folks if they want to learn more about what you're doing, how can they get a hold of you and read the articles and the work that you have done.
Well, thank you, Sargis, and thank you so much for having me on. Well, as my last word, I want to agree 110% with what you just said about, nation building, going in, telling everybody what to do and so forth. We found that doesn't work. This will empower people directly by allowing them a better opportunity to earn income on the internet, for example. And when you do that, when you give somebody, that's empowerment. They can decide for themselves whether their highest priority is to fix the roof on their house because rainy season is coming, or whether it's to band together and make a school for their kids, or whether it's better health care or whatever that they can go out and purchase because you've empowered them with a salary. And that's, so I think that's the dignified way. We treat people with dignity that way. Allow them to participate and help themselves. And so that's why this has become my mission. And folks who want to know more, we do have a video. I saw some of the scenes from it on the screen. We have a video at ChangeInEx.com. That's also on the screen. It's been a real pleasure to be on and a pleasure to know you, and I look forward to working together in the future.
No, definitely, and I know that we're probably, hopefully, getting back to follow up on what we put on the table to the Senate and House staffers. I think if they can digest it, I think hopefully we could see some, as I said in my opening comments, some needed legislation in this year's Congress. But I'm glad we came together on this, and it's funny how sometimes these doors open up. When I was trying to solve the issue from a digital currency perspective at the lowest levels, as far as trying to support those NGOs, and then you putting your perspective on the table. And all we could do is do our best to brief and tell Congress is the best way to do it. Let's hope that they understand, digest it, and are able to put some key legislation on the table. If not in this Congress, next year Congress, and this should be across the aisle, right? It is not a Democrat Republican issue. It actually helps our country move forward and counter against the Chinese Communist Party operations throughout the globe. Stephen, it's good to have you here, buddy. Thank you again for the short turnaround, and I'll see you. We got more missions we got to do together in the long run, and we will have you back again.
Thanks, Sargis. Thanks so much.
God bless. There's new paradigms.
Over 2 billion people are unbanked. They lack access to financial services due to post-9/11 regulation. Any replacements will eventually have to comply with the same Know Your Customer and anti-money laundering regulations as banking institutions, leaving the poorest and post-conflict societies unbanked or underbanked. Of the 2 billion unbanked persons worldwide, over 1 billion have a smartphone. ChangeInEx brings the basic human right to buy and sell into the new era of biometrics and blockchain banking, combining the necessary regulatory, political, legal, and technical expertise to succeed.
We came here to try to uncover some of the stories of the people and to see how we can help bring investment here, how we can help to bring the kind of economic activity that's going to help people to rebuild their lives. ChangeInEx brings people property rights who don't have them. It allows them to buy and sell. It allows them to, when they acquire skills, it allows them to sell them on a global marketplace. And we believe that a decentralized solution like this, that allows people to create jobs for themselves, that allows people to send and receive money with their family overseas, is the best way to spark the rebuilding.
Hanan, a translator in Iraq, has the ability to work, but not the ability to bank.
My name is Hanan and I live in Al-Qosh. I work as a teacher in the towns around here. But the problem, I couldn't get paid. Here in Iraq we lack any method of payment due to some circumstances. So I couldn't complete the contract process with the companies that I'm working with. If there was any method of paying money, for example, to wire this money, it would be better. So it will empower many people who have the skills and people who will acquire skills to work in the future with many projects like that can be worked online. It's not fun working without get paid.
In a place like Karakash, a place that was occupied by ISIS not too long ago, it's especially important to be able to bring global commerce, to be able to bring the ability to sell your labor to others in other countries. And that's what ChangeInEx is all about.
So here we are in Mexico City. This is a diverse, massive economic hub that really feeds the entire region. Now, it's not exactly the place where you think financial exclusion would happen. In fact, Mexico law mandates that banks provide financial access to all persons. However, only 44% of Mexicans over the age of 18 have a digital bank account.
The supply chain problem in Mexico and a lot of countries is they don't find credit to provide, to a big company or to an anchor company something. But they have, they produce pottery, but they cannot scale it because they don't have the credit. But no one wants to give them the credit because they don't have a contract with a big company. Then it's this dilemma of the egg and the chicken.
So what sets Mexico apart from other countries that face financial exclusion is that it actually has an incredibly robust economic system. There are incredible financial institutions. There's a world-class industrial and manufacturing base. There's a vibrant and global economy. However, that doesn't change the fact that over 60% of the population is financially excluded. This means they lack access to digital banking, they lack access to traditional bank accounts, and they simply can't participate in this robust economic system. This simply pushed to the edges.
Every human should have access to the global banking system, no matter their circumstances. From every corner of the world, ChangeInEx is not only revolutionizing the way banking is accessed and used globally, but also how we will understand banking in years to come.